on, get your skis. We're going on a long ski. Make sure you get the right skis. All right, make sure you put your skis on the right way. The right ski is the one with the hole in the right binding. And the left ski, of course, has the hole on the left side of the binding. There.
Well, I'm surveying the pipeline here.
What's a pipeline?
It's a large steel pipe that carries natural gas right across Canada.
What's natural gas?
Natural gas? Well, that's the stuff that you burn in your furnace to keep your houses warm in the winter and use in your ovens and stoves to make dinner.
How does it get here?
Once it's out of the ground and into the pipe, we push it along with what we call compressors. Boy, you kids sure have a lot of questions.
Where does it come from?
It comes from way out west. Maybe I should start at the beginning and tell you kids the whole story. The story of natural gas starts in Western Canada, here in the foothills of Alberta. Deep underground, gas is trapped in rock formations. Getting it out takes a lot of work and a lot of money. But the result is an abundant, reliable fuel for the future. This drilling rig is on the side of Plateau Mountain, just north of Waterton National Park. It's part of the Shell Waterton gas field. Gas from hundreds of fields, like the Waterton field, is brought to the eastern border of Alberta, in the Badlands along the South Saskatchewan River. By far the biggest natural gas delivery point in Canada. This is called Empress Gate. Here the pipe crosses over the river and into Saskatchewan. At the same time, it flows into the TransCanada pipeline system. After crossing the river, it arrives at TransCanada's most westerly facility, Compressor Station Number 2, Burstall, Saskatchewan. More than 5 billion cubic feet of gas passes through this station every day. That's more than 1.6 trillion cubic feet a year. Enough gas to supply a city the size of Montreal for more than 10 years. But it's not enough. In the late 1980s, environmental concerns and price made natural gas the fuel in demand. To the people at TransCanada PipeLines, the answer was clear. More pipeline capacity was needed. A construction project began which would spread across Canada and into the United States. 2,500 kilometers of pipe would be laid and $4.7 billion would be spent. The largest pipeline project in Canada in 35 years was underway. The work would begin out here on the Great Prairies of southern Saskatchewan. For the most part, laying pipe out here is easy going, a straight line from Empress to Winnipeg. But the prairie offers its own challenges to the construction crews, and a strict code of operation exists to make sure the job is done right. The first stage of construction is to protect the valuable layer of topsoil. This monster contraption is a conveyor belt mounted on the front of a bulldozer. The belt pushes the topsoil to the side of the right-of-way, safely out of the way of the rest of the construction. Not far away, the steel pipe is being delivered by railway. Here, the pipe will be unloaded and trucked to the construction site. pipe is moved 3 or 4 at a time. It's then unloaded onto wooden skids. This is called stringing the pipe. Depending on the size of the job and the type of terrain, miles and miles of pipe can be strung out. The next step is getting the straight steel pipe to fit the not-so-straight ground. Even though from the air a right-of-way looks like a perfectly straight line, on the ground it's up and down and around corners. So the pipe has to fit the terrain. That's where the pipe bending crews come in. Using a giant hydraulic machine, the pipe is literally bent to fit. Despite the brute strength it takes to bend steel pipe, this is an exact science, which takes exact measurements to make sure everything fits just right. Once the pipe is bent and laying alongside where the ditch is going to be, the right-of-way comes alive. The soft soil of the prairies makes the going easy. At the front end, a giant ditching machine carves out a perfectly formed trench. It inches its way along right on top of where the line will go, creating a tidy pile of dirt to the side of the right-of-way. And while the ditch is being prepared, the welding crews are out in full force. The welding gang, as they're called, is where the bulk of the workers are. It's a rolling assembly line where up to 100 men and giant machines are perfectly choreographed to make a bunch of pieces of steel into a pipeline. The first pass of the welders is on the inside of the pipe. The two pieces are held together by an air-powered clamp. And an automatic welding system does the first pass on the inside of the pipe. While the internal weld is being made, the external welds have already begun. That's where these automatic welding huts come in. Dangling on the end of a side boom, these huts have revolutionized the job of pipeline welder. Inside the huts, the steel is protected from dirt, dust, or water, which can cause defects. The welding bugs, as they're called, also give a uniform weld as they travel around the pipe on an alignment track. Each welding hut adds to the weld, building onto the one that passed before, until a final weld is complete or capped out. When all things go as planned, welding crews like this one can join several kilometers of pipe a day. Behind the welders is the X-ray crew. It's their job to make sure the welds are acceptable, permanent connections. They wrap each weld with a strap of film. Film is processed on the spot, and an inspector from TransCanada PipeLines is there to give them the once-over. If he finds something wrong, the weld is repaired. There's no room for error on a job like this. Once the welds are coated and the pipe is given the okay, it's time to go underground. The side booms are brought in again, this time outfitted with rollers. They move in unison down the line, lowering the pipe gently into the ditch. Finally, the backhoes return to the scene and begin backfilling. The final job is to carefully replace the topsoil and return the land to the farmer for another season of planting. But in some areas, the work is far from over. In far western Saskatchewan lies one of the most sensitive landscapes in Canada. The Great Sand Hills is a true desert, complete with shifting dunes and cactus, a refuge for some of Canada's endangered animals. TransCanada PipeLines has been operating a pipeline in the Sandhills for more than 35 years, working on better ways to protect the desert. In the fall and winter of 1990, a fifth large-diameter pipeline was installed. Afterwards, TransCanada did some extraordinary work to restore the landscape. It's now the summer of 1991, and a group of local landowners, politicians, and environmentalists are taking a tour of the area where the construction took place. This is a chance for everyone to see how the restoration work took hold, and to see firsthand if the desert could bounce back.
Okay, over there by the bales?
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good.
On this side, you'll notice the small dips in the ground. That's caused by howder gouging, which is small furrows are created in the ground, and the seed is placed in the furrows. You'll notice in this area there's more grass species growing than there was at the crimped area. It seems to give them a little bit more shelter and shade to get started. And it looks like it's quite an effective method.
Another method is to build windbreaks with hay bales. On many of the hills, this method works quite well to stabilize the shifting sands.
As you notice here, we've put the bales in. This was an area which was very unstable in the past, and we've put bales in here to help stabilize, to reduce the wind exposure. And as you can see, the bales were put in last fall, and now the vegetation has got very nicely established in here. The wind not affecting the soil here. It's all stabilized, and I think we have a pretty good restoration program going.
The restoration of the Great Sandhills was a great success in 1991, and it taught people from the area and the people from TransCanada PipeLines what could be done to protect the desert. In the town of Sceptre, the relationship between the pipeline and the Sandhills region has blossomed as a piece of folk art, a mural celebrating the two.
When the construction began, of course, there were people from all over the country, plus the United States coming, and of course you get new ideas, new insights into what goes on in other places in the world. And it certainly has helped all the communities grow, both financially and socially. It has made me think of how, something that has started here is going miles, thousands of miles in different directions, and it gives you a sense of being connected, just sort of like the TransCanada Highway, I guess. It's beautiful living in this area. Like quite often you hear people say, well, what, or in fact my husband's one of them, whatever made our grandparents stop here, But this year, especially with all the rain, it really is beautiful. And I've always found beauty in the country and in the landscape. Like we have beautiful sunsets, and the Sandhills are nice to look at. The whole landscape is nice, and it's nice to paint.
The relationship between TransCanada PipeLines and all the people along the line is one that has been building since the mid-50s. It was in 1956 that the first pipeliners appeared on the scene in western Saskatchewan. The Canadian pipeline industry was in its infancy, and virtually all the expertise had to be imported.
Got a lot of rock out over that time, boss. Yes, we did, Red.
Construction as far as Winnipeg went well, and the Manitoba capital welcomed the gas enthusiastically.
Congratulations to the TransCanada and the Winnipeg Central Gas Company as they bring natural gas to the province of Manitoba for the first time.
Now they turn on the gas. the solid rock of the Canadian Shield.
But the tough going was ahead. The Texans who built the line had never encountered terrain quite so tough nor quite so big as the bushland of northern Ontario.
Are biting away at the rock.
This rock is tough. There's no mistake about it. It's tough. It's about the toughest that I've ever seen. Shot this bluff 3 times, and we'll have to shoot it 2 or 3 times more in order to bring it down to grade so we can move in with the twin drills you just saw working to shoot her dead.
After years of blasting away at the rock, the pipeline was finally completed at this well near Kapuskasing, Ontario in 1958. With the completion of the line to Montreal, a new transportation giant was born, all for the cost of $375 million. Natural gas was no longer only the fuel of the future, it was the fuel of the present.
Yes, where food is finest, it's cooked with gas. See the gas range display at your gas company or gas appliance dealer. Find out for yourself why more people than ever are cooking with gas.
A few years later in 1964, work started on expanding the system. This time the Canadian Shield was bypassed and the route through the United States was used, adding the Great Lakes gas transmission system to the TransCanada family. Over the years, more lines were added. Today, the system is expanding once again. In some places, a 6th line is being installed. 6 large diameter pipelines running parallel across one of the largest countries in the world. Today's expansion will cost more than 12 times what was spent to install the original line in 1958. A lot of that money will be spent on steel pipe, virtually all of it from Canadian suppliers. IPSCO is one of 3 plants making pipe for this round of construction. It has close to 1,000 employees working in its mill. That makes it Regina's largest employer next to the government. And it's the only company that makes the pipe from scratch on the same site. Scrap like old cars is brought in from around North America to feed these giant cauldrons. The first step in the process of putting a pipeline in the ground begins here. The molten steel is poured into one long slab, and then using natural gas torches, the steel is cut into pieces, which are easier to handle. Once the slabs cool, they're rolled into large spools, and then it's off to the pipe mills. This is called a spiral mill. It's very simple. The steel plate is twisted so that it forms a long spiral. At this mill, it's welded as it's twisted and X-rayed only a few feet away. Once a long enough section is formed, a new section of pipe is cut off. Like all the pipe mills, this one in Regina is only busy when a pipeline system is expanding. In the summer of 1991, it's operating 24 hours a day, filling the TransCanada order.
My name is Gord Chatwin. I've been employed at Stelpipe Stelco for 25 years. Presently, I'm a diesel operator. My normal job is I'm a conductor. Right now, we're in a period of time where everybody wants large diameter pipe, so all the pipe mills in North America are fairly busy. We've had periods of time when either the UNO or the Stelform have been shut down for extended lengths of time. We've had periods of time when both mills have been shut down. Good example is 1982. Both of our facilities were down for 18 months. As the mills start going down, what happens is they start laying people off. It's rough. The upsides are when we're busy now, like with TransCanada, is that basically we're working 6 days a week, making some extra money. Hopefully everybody's putting a little bit into the bank so that when we get into some of the lean times, they're going to have some money put away. There was a notice put up in the plant yesterday Iroquois Gas, which is owned by TransCanada, is requesting 8,000 feet of pipe. For us to take that order, we're going to work the next 2 Sundays in the UNO mill so that we can fit it into our schedule. So there's always things that are happening that we have people here that have been here 8 months. We have people that have been here 30 years. So it's a situation where we're just going to have to wait it out, do the best we can. Hopefully we can get a lot of work for TransCanada and some other customers and keep busy. I basically hope TransCanada keeps going and they keep expanding. Basically, TransCanada is, I look at one of our best customers. They provide us with a lot of work here, and hopefully they keep expanding and we keep busy. We have a number of people here that like to retire.
When all the pipe mills across the country are busy on a job like this one, it's more than the steel workers who feel the effects. Their friends and neighbors in the towns in which they live also enjoy the benefits. Here in north-central Alberta is the town of Camrose. It's the home of another Stel pipe plant. This one makes pipe a different way. It's called the U&O method. That simply means sheets of steel are rolled into the plant and underneath a huge press. The press bends the steel into a U shape. It's then rolled under a second, even larger press. The steel is bent into the shape of the pipe. It's welded into place and tested to make sure everything holds. And there is one more important step the pipe must go through to finish it off. Here, as at all the pipe mills in Canada, is another plant run by Shaw Pipe. Shaw takes the pipe and coats it inside and out. First, they grind off any imperfections. It's then heated up by this machine. Using an electromagnetic field, the molecules in the steel are excited, which causes the pipe to heat up to high temperatures. Once the pipe is hot, it's blasted with beads of epoxy coating. This coating dries hard as a rock. It cools down on its way to the final spot on the assembly line. The pipe is now ready to be shipped by rail to the numerous construction sites across Canada. Although the pipe now leaves Camrose behind, it leaves a legacy for the town, a legacy that will help Camrose grow.
Stel Pipe and Shaw are two of our greatest manufacturing employees, of course. Over the years since 1960, Stelco has provided a tremendous amount of employment, as well as economic spin-off to everything from carpenters to plumbers and welders and so on. It's a cash business, and the cash hits our cash registers downtown real suddenly. My name is Dennis Toomey, and I'm the Economic Development Coordinator for the City of Camrose. There's a very direct connection between the huge mega projects like that and a city like Camrose. We're small, we're 13,000. And close to 300 or 400 people involved in this one particular type of the business, piping business. Over the next few years, the pipelining business is going to be phenomenal in North America, and pretty little Camrose is right in the middle of it. I think we're very fortunate, and we're going to see a lot of development and a lot of growth because of it. Long-term, Shaw, for example, just made a $10 million investment in Camrose, and they didn't do that for the short term. They're here for a long time, and this project alone assures us that they have a great deal of faith in our little city, and that certainly helps us to have the same amount of faith. We're planning well for it.
My name is Shane Heiner. I'm from Rayedzo, Northwest Territories. We're in We're in Winnipeg, just outside of Winnipeg. I'm inspecting for TransCanada pipelines for pipeline construction.
Most of the people working on the line are local people, hired from the area where the work is taking place. But on this job, there's an exception. Shane Heiner is one of 6 young northern natives inspecting the mainline construction, learning the job from the ground up.
I was afraid that I'd be treated a lot different because of my age or something. They just treat us like one of the guys, like no favoritism. They just treat us normally, like you're an inspector too. When we first came down here, it was so hot for us, we couldn't stand it. Everybody else is walking around and then, oh, it's not bad, it's cold out. And we were just like sitting here just sweating. Hard to get used to it.
Shane and the other native inspectors are working in southern Canada to bring some experience back to their communities along the Mackenzie River to learn firsthand what a pipeline is all about and share it with others, in the event that someday a gas pipeline is built to the Arctic.
The older people, especially old people, they're really old-fashioned, and they're not too, they don't know what's going on. But the younger people tell them, like, I'll go home. And some of them didn't understand what pipeline or what the concept was, but I'd understand it, or I'd tell them in my own language, and they'd understand it. People are starting to read about us in the papers and stuff like that. And TransCanada, even we get the TransCanada news up north, and they'll say pipelines, and they say, isn't that company you work for? And I said, yeah. And they just like, wow, that's good. There's a lot of people back home in my hometown are really proud of me.
Mon nom c'est Luc Atelier, je ferme avec ma femme ici, Luc et Joël Catelier. On ferme à peu près 200 acres de terrain, un petit peu de céréales, mais on est dans les légumes. On est à peu près à 25 000 au sud de Winnipeg.
Making a go of it on the family farm has been a struggle for many on the prairies. Luc and Joël Catelier are no different. Luc works a full day on the farm and then a night shift at a local sugar beet processing plant. When a new pipeline comes through, it's good news.
It is a bonus to have a pipeline, I think, going through your area. Yeah. It's like a railroad. It's extra assessment. It's there. It doesn't. I mean, you keep on farming. You keep on doing your work as well. It doesn't stop you from or prevent or change anything that you do.
When a pipeline does cross farmland, the farmers are paid for the crops lost that year.
I've talked to a lot of people, and they're quite satisfied I think, on the prices that the pipeline gives. We've had, for example, I know that the provincial government buys out land for water resources, and they're nowhere near, I think, what TransCanada is paying. I think TransCanada is taking the route that they want to be friendly, and if they have to come by, they like to be on friendly terms, I suppose.
My name's Ed Leland, and I'm a farmer, and we're right on my farm on the edge of a tiny little hamlet called Niagara River in Manitoba.
Ed's land is also crossed by the TransCanada main line, and he too sees pipeline construction as a helping hand.
There's no money when there's no construction because they've bought the land and you just get to work the surface for nothing, I guess you might say. But the year they're going through, it's probably a shot in the arm.
Ed has a long history with the pipeline. His father's farm was crossed by the original line in the late 50s.
Oh yeah, I can remember one side boom operator. He was really a neat guy. He had a little pup with him all the time that fit into his coat pocket, and he'd give us a ride on the cats and stuff like this. So all us kids were always out along the line watching, hoping we'd get a chance to go for a ride.
Ed's early memories were rekindled when expansion in the early 70s brought another pipeline and a chance to get out on the line.
Yeah, and a bunch of us guys, when we graduated or quit school, whichever came first, would get a job on the pipeline. Oh, lots of good memories. It was big money, and times were good then. You could quit one job and get another if you didn't like it, and yeah, things were great. Guys around here, like, I guess it was the best place to get a job because we knew when it was going through, it was right in our backyard, so we've all kind of had an attachment to it, I guess you might say. Like, the main line CNR Railroad goes through here too, so I quite often will think the same about that. You're watching a train go through and you dream about where it might stop or where it came from. Same as the gas, yeah.
Ed's life on the farm has provided him with plenty of material for his other career. As a country and western singer and songwriter, the romance with the pipeline has provided inspiration.
Okay, let's do another take, John. You ready for another one, Ed? Okay, here it comes.
Diesel smoke and a grinding track, hooker feels the cable slack. Trucker rolling down the road, 3 long pipes is a heavy load. Long before the sun does shine, buses head her down the line, leaving men to work all day on the right-of-way. Just before the break of day, swampers curse the cold and clay. Bosses say we got to go, sunshine, rain or snow. Working hard the whole day through, afterwards have 1 or 2. Talk about the good old days and the times ahead. Pipeline days and pipeline nights, long highways, small town lights. Two-fly road gonna take me there, anytime, yeah, anywhere.
The first snows of winter have blanketed the bush country near the Manitoba-Ontario border, and the first person on the construction site is making his rounds.
My name's Darren Drum, and I'm from Hamilton, Ontario. I've been an environmental inspector with TransCanada PipeLines since last January. Well, we try to get out here before the contractor begins any construction, and we flag off any environmentally sensitive areas such as water crossings or wildlife nesting areas or archaeological sites. And we flag these off so that the contractor is aware that these sites exist when they come up to them, and they can take the precautionary measures to minimize the impact. There's advantages to winter construction, mainly when you deal with a lot of wetlands. It's access problems present themselves, and during winter, swamps and wetlands are frozen over, and it makes our impact a lot less severe. One area in this particular region that is identified as an ecologically sensitive area, and that's due to the presence of great gray owl nesting sites. And so we time our construction so as not to interfere or cause an impact on the nesting activities. What we look for there is we try to maintain the vegetation along the bank, and the main concerns are fisheries habitat and not to impair the water quality. So we flag off the area so that when the contractor approaches it, they don't run equipment through it, causing downstream sedimentation or disturb any of the vegetation along the bank, causing erosion problems. Yeah, I try to keep the fisheries concerns in mind, the species that we're dealing with, and once again, this is a warm water stream, so we're looking at pike and walleye fisheries habitat. I think the present situation is very good. TransCanada Pipeline is one of the leading corporate citizens in the environmental protection field. The job that we do out here is, I would say, is very good.
In northern Ontario, the first crews on site prepare the right-of-way for construction. Depending on the area, the bush is cleared different ways. If it's good stands of timber, they'll be harvested, either by TransCanada crews or, in some cases, local foresters or landowners. But if it's just scrub brush, as in this case, it's mulched right on the spot. The clearing crews reveal the pipeliner's biggest headache, the hardest rock in the world, the rock of the Canadian Shield. The only way to bury a pipeline in this part of the country is to blow a hole big enough to put it in. As you can imagine, it's one of the toughest and most important jobs on the pipeline, a job where safety is everything.
It's a lot of common sense, eh? It's just safety, eh? And, like, you got skidooers out here, and you've got guys working on the line, trappers, hunters. Summertime, you've got blueberry pickers in this country here, or something else, eh? But it's safety, eh? All the way, and common sense.
Common sense is key when you're dealing with the amount of dynamite it takes to shatter this rock. The trick to doing it right is where you place the charges. First, holes have to be drilled into the rock. A whole section of right-of-way will be drilled and the charges put in the holes. In most cases, the new trench is only a few meters away from the existing pipeline, which is still full of gas. So the blasts are carefully monitored to prevent damage to the adjacent lines. Setting off the charges even milliseconds apart reduces the size of the shock wave and looks something like this. Another technique used to minimize the flying debris is rubber matting, shredded up old tires sewn together like a giant quilt. These mats are laid right on top of the explosives. For the workers on the blasting crews, safety is everything. For many, safety means lots of experience and lots of trust among their fellow workers.
We've got a pretty tight-knit bunch of guys we've been with. Like I've got some guys here I've been with for, like Donnie Keller and Les Fur. I've been with them guys for 22 years. And it's more or less family, eh? Like you really work good together and we stay together, eh? And the guys I work with, my crew, they're all a good bunch of men. You can walk away and you can count on them, eh?
Winter in Northern Ontario is more than just work. Winter in Northern Ontario is hockey season, and everyone needs a break from the hectic construction schedule to indulge in Canada's national pastime. This sparkling display of hockey talent is the annual challenge tournament between the folks at the TransCanada office in Thunder Bay and the workers from the compressor stations near Nipigon and Geraldton, Ontario. It's a chance for the people in the remote communities to have a weekend in Thunder Bay and to touch bases with the people from the regional office. But there's one player who doesn't have to get reacquainted with anyone. Bob Latimer is one of the most well-known people along this stretch of the pipeline. Bob's always dropping in on just about everyone along the line in Northern Ontario. That's his job. Bob is one of TransCanada's patrol pilots.
Patrol job on the pipeline is to patrol the pipeline for the security of the people living along the line for TransCanada Pipelines. And it's done in most areas, in my area once a week, some areas a few times a week. And the patrol is done for the security of the gas system itself and any disruption of the flow of gas, people building roads over top of the pipeline.
Bob, like all the TransCanada Pipelines pilots, is loaded with experience. Having flown all sorts of aircraft all over the hemisphere, Bob joined TransCanada in the 1970s. In the nomadic world of helicopter pilots, being a patrol pilot with a company like TransCanada is as close to having a normal home life as possible. But sometimes there's more to Bob's job than the pipeline. Being a helicopter pilot in Northern Ontario means you may be called upon anytime someone disappears into this vast bush land.
They know that if they get stuck in a time of need, they can call on TransCanada, and we don't have any problem getting the helicopter to release to help some of these people. Some of the other pilots have taken people in the bush caught. I have myself in the same situation. We've gone down to crashed airplanes and brought the people out there or to help out. We've also worked in people lost, kids, adults in the bush, and a lot of lost hunters we get called to every year. It's satisfying in that we go out and try and help these people right at the most important time and probably the only people that can. even if it isn't as fortunate as you can, at least you know that you've been of some help.
But most of the time, Bob can be seen flying between his base in Thunder Bay and the many communities along the line in northern Ontario, from Kenora to Dryden to Geraldton to Kapuskasing. And no, he never gets bored.
That's probably the most common question asked of me. And no, because every day is different. Just like today was different, I had different people on board. Tomorrow will be different, the weather will be different. I'll be asked to go in a different area. And with TransCanada, we fly long distances where our patrols are all above usually 200 miles. So we're going 200, 300, or 400 miles out and returning that day or the next day, and see a lot of different country and get to meet a lot of people. I hope to keep flying until the end of my career with TransCanada, and I really enjoy TransCanada. I think it's a good company, and yeah, I hope to end my career flying. I like to fly, and if you enjoy your job, that's really important.
As the sun just peeks over the horizon, an important delivery is being made to one of TransCanada's compressor stations in central Saskatchewan. It's part of another phase of construction that is just as important as laying the mainline pipe. For every extra kilometer of pipe in the ground, there has to be more horsepower to pump the gas. This truck has been on the road for 5 days, from a factory in Ohio to Grenfell, to deliver a giant compressor. This is the piece of equipment that pushes the billions of cubic feet of gas along the line every day. This particular unit weighs in at close to 50 tons. But of course, this is just the mechanism that moves the gas, the equivalent of a transmission in a car, so to speak. It needs a pretty big engine to operate it. So the pipeline has turned to the aerospace industry for an engine capable of delivering the horsepower needed. The same type of engines that power the world's airlines also run the pipeline. More than 100 of these jets are in service along TransCanada's system. These giant jet engines are mounted in a compressor building attached to a turbine and a compressor. The engines are slightly modified to run on natural gas, which of course is in abundance around here. The gas comes into the engine here and is ignited. The thrust from the exhaust turns the turbine, which in turn spins an impeller in the compressor. The impeller, the opposite of a propeller, pushes the gas into the pipe, increasing the pressure in the line downstream from the station. The byproduct of this process is a hot exhaust, which is low on harmful emissions. So low that in at least one place, it's used to grow vegetables. At the station near Raymore, the exhaust is captured by this huge duct. From here, it goes underground and across a fence line into the Entergreen greenhouse. When it's 35 degrees below zero, the exhaust from the compressor station is hot enough and abundant enough to keep the 3 acres under this greenhouse roof toasty warm. Warm enough to grow the best tomatoes in northern Ontario. Summertime in one of Canada's most famous places, Niagara Falls, Ontario. Every year, millions of people come from all over the world to see the Niagara River cascade over the edge of the falls. In 1991, a gang of pipeline workers also came to the banks of the Niagara River, but not to stand and look at the falls. They came to install a pipeline, a joint project between TransCanada PipeLines and Tennessee Gas Pipelines, which would break new ground in pipeline engineering. Just a few miles downstream of the falls, past the Niagara Gorge and the massive hydroelectric plants, down to where the river becomes a little more hospitable, is the crossing site. 2 lines already go underneath the river here. They were laid in the late 1950s.
We had 2 existing river crossings, 2 20-inch that were built back in the 50s, and they were put in by conventional method, which is drill, blast, and trench. And we have 2 20-inch crossings that were put in at that time.
In the 30 years since then, the area has been built up. A park has been formed, and the trees have grown to maturity.
Now, since then, there's a lot of environmental concerns. There's a Niagara Park Commission, which was built up through the area for recreation, where they've got a green belt going through there. It's also of historical importance. We've got archaeological sites on the Canadian side, and on the American side, also there's fisheries aspects to deal with. And in conjunction, that's a very heavily populated area, very sensitive. You have triple-decker tour buses going through, you have bike paths, you have recreation areas that are under full utilization during the summer period, which is when the construction's going on. And you've also got recreation use, of the river itself. One of the methods which we ended up employing was directional drilling. What it came down to is directional drilling that had been done to date in rock. There was 12-inch crossings and 16-inch crossings. This essentially posed a leap forward. We're dealing with a 30-inch pipeline that we're going to be putting in, a 42-inch drilled hole that we would be opening the hole up to a 32-inch, or 42-inch rather, and then pulling the pipeline back through. So it was a technological leap.
The directional drill technique, in theory, is actually quite simple. Drill a hole underneath the bottom of the river and pull the pipe into the hole. The surface of the river is never disturbed. The trick, though, is to drill the hole in the right place and to make it big enough for a 30-inch diameter pipe. The driller, based on the American side, uses laser sightings and a magnetic field to steer the drill bit underneath the river and into Canada. The drilling began on the American side at the beginning of August 1991. Meanwhile, on the Canadian side, the site was being cleared for the expected arrival of the drill bit. The pilot hole, as it's called, takes several weeks, but eventually the driller comes through and the bit arrives only inches away from the target stake. Now the heavy work of making the hole larger begins. The reaming process takes another 2.5 months. All the while, the traffic on the Niagara Parkway continues undisturbed.
By doing the directional drill, essentially everybody was driving by there. Nobody even knew the directional drill was going on underneath. You're 50 feet below the river. There's people fishing on the river. Never realized that the directional drill is actually going underneath of it.
The work continued through the rest of the summer and on into the fall. Finally, in late November, the 800-meter-long hole was wide enough to attempt to put the pipe in. The pipe was welded together in one long section. A dozen side booms and a couple of cranes were put in place to lift the pipe to the appropriate angle to fit it into the hole. At one point, the pipe dangled 20 meters in the air. To pull the pipe, a plug had to be welded on the front end. A universal joint was also added so that the pipe wouldn't spin. When all was ready, the mud motor cranked up for one last trip through the hole and underneath the Niagara River. On the American side, the crew tripped out for the last time. The tripping took a couple of days. Less than 2 weeks after the pipe started going in the hole, it was tied in and in operation. A new link had been made between the two countries.
To our knowledge, this is the longest pipe crossing with the largest diameter pipe installed in rock that we know of using the directional drilling method. Overall, it was a successful project.
Much farther downstream from Niagara, work is proceeding on another important river crossing. This one across the St. Lawrence River to connect the new Iroquois gas transmission system with the Canadian main line. This crossing will be done in a more conventional way. A trench will be dredged on the bottom of the river and the pipe laid in the trench. A long and difficult job. The dredging of the river is done by 2 barges on both sides of the international boundary. On both sides, the operators are working blind, unable to see the bottom of the river. they have to work by feel. Their only guide on the surface is a laser beam which keeps the barges online. The dredging takes almost 2 months in the middle of one of the busiest and narrowest shipping lanes in North America. On shore, other crews are preparing the pipe for the day the trench is ready. First, it's coated in concrete to make sure it stays on the bottom of the river. The coated pipe sections are then lined up on the American side, set on a series of rollers. Pontoons are strapped to the top to help lessen the weight of the pipe as it's pulled across the bottom of the river. A cable is pulled from the Canadian side across to the American and attached to a plug welded to the end of the pipe. A diver makes one last walk through the trench.
We're just looking for big rocks in the ditch and make sure the cable, right now we're making sure the pull cable's in the ditch. We'll swim all the way across.
Okay, fellas, Jim, we're about ready to go. Pipe's moving real slow. I'm going to turn Pete loose here in a minute. As soon as I get him turned loose, get hooked back up, then we'll kick it up a little bit.
It takes the best part of the day to pull the first section of pipe into the river. The next section is then brought into place.
Hold it. Hold it.
The process is repeated 6 times over the next 3 days. Finally, on a brilliant sunny morning, the scene everyone has been waiting for. The pipe appears, and a link between Canada and the new Iroquois gas transmission system is complete. South of the St. Lawrence River, the new Iroquois line is being blasted through upstate New York. Here, the hilly country more resembles northern Ontario rather than the farmland just across the river. It's hard rock country, and preparing a pipeline right-of-way is a lot of work, especially if it's a new pipeline. St. Lawrence County, New York may be in the same state, but it's light years from New York City, a rural area where people eke out a living off the land. The arrival of the Iroquois pipeline was a welcome sight.
I've been very happy with the work, and it has been a tremendous plus to the North Country because much of this pipeline goes through bushlands, and it has been converted into small meadows. And all the farmers' fields that were torn up are being reseeded to what they were beforehand. We just wish we could tap into it here for the greenhouse.
The gas will be heading to an area hungry for clean burning fuel. The region served by Iroquois, from New York City north to Boston, is still largely dependent on imported oil. The Alberta gas delivered by the Iroquois line will make the skies much clearer, eliminating more than 75,000 tons of sulfur emissions that were being put into the air every year. Getting the pipeline built was a big job. The paperwork through the various levels of government in 2 countries took about 4 years. The actual construction began in the summer of 1991 and was finished in the early winter of 1992. The biggest challenge facing the pipeliners was the 41-kilometer crossing of Long Island Sound. To do the job, one of the biggest barges in the world was employed to lay the pipe into the water. To get an idea of the size of this floating construction platform, a football field would fit across its span, and another 3 would fit nicely alongside. On board, the pipeline is put together as it would be on dry land. The 40-foot sections are welded together, X-rayed, and coated with concrete. As the barge moves slowly along the waters of Long Island Sound, it trails out a length of continuous 24-inch diameter pipe. The heavy pipe coated in concrete settles on the bottom of the sound. There is now 41 kilometers of pipe on the bottom of the ocean carrying gas to Long Island. And from there, the gas flows into one of the world's largest cities. Throughout the winter, the work continues through northern Ontario. Minus 35 degrees near Raymore doesn't stop the work. In fact, nothing Mother Nature dishes out can stop construction. The bitter cold doesn't change the way the work is done either. About the only thing different is the torches have to stay on the pipe a little longer to get the steel hot enough for welding. If nothing else, winter construction reminds everyone involved how important their job is, how important it is to get the gas into people's homes and keep their furnaces running. One of the places that relies on the gas is Montreal, one of Canada's oldest, most beautiful, and most dynamic cities. Montreal has been linked to the gas fields of Alberta since the first line was finished in 1958. On the west end of Montreal Island is the community of Pointe Claire. On this day, the thermometer is hovering around minus 25. But the cold doesn't stop a crew from Gaz Métropolitain. Gaz Métropolitain has served Greater Montreal with natural gas for more than 30 years and has been one of TransCanada's biggest and best customers from the beginning. Today, they're adding another new customer. A restaurant in Pointe Claire wants to start cooking with natural gas. Gas has long been the choice of great cooks around the world because it burns hot and consistent. Natural gas helps make the best dishes better. In the case of this restaurant, the gas will replace these propane tanks. No longer will the cook here rely on a truck coming around to keep these tanks full. Instead, the flow of gas will always be there at his fingertips. Voila, a fine meal in Montreal, prepared with the help of gas from Alberta. A truly continental experience. Bon appétit! So you see, there's a lot more to a pipeline than steel. A pipeline is really all about people. The people along the line.
Diesel smoke from a side boom stack, holding on to a welder's shack. Weld that pipe, then lay it down gently in the cold, cold ground. Early morning, rise and shine, got to get out to the line. Got to be there every day, lay that pipe away. Faded shirts and Levi jeans, yellow paint on big machines. Iron and muscle pull as one till the job is done. Just before the sun goes down, buses head her back to town. Pipe and dirt fade out of sight till the morning light. Pipeline days and pipeline nights, long highways, small town lights. Shoe-fly road gonna take me there, anytime, yeah, anywhere. Pipeline days and pipeline nights, long highways, small town lights. Shoe-fly road gonna take me there, anytime, yeah, anywhere. Pipeline days and pipeline nights, long highways, small town lights. Shoe-fly road gonna take me there, anytime, yeah, anywhere.